Let's talk to Kevin Schofield and find out what he makes of it all. Kevin, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
It's a hardy annual, this, I know, but I mean, people, particularly under the current climate, where they're being told that pensioners in particular are not going to be given their winter heating allowance, and then they find out that people in the cabinet and all, and I'm not going to just single out Labour MPs, I'm sure we could find plenty of Tory MPs doing the same thing. It's not right, is it? It doesn't look good.
No, I can understand why people are annoyed about it, you know, not least because energy prices in the last couple of years have gone through the roof and people struggle enough to pay their own bills, so they think, well, hang on a minute, why should I be contributing to the bills of MPs as well? But you're right, it's not just Labour MPs, they just happen to be in government at the moment, which makes it a bit more...
And that's the point, because they're, you know, it's the Labour government that have told pensioners they're not going to get winter fuel allowance anymore.
Yeah, and I think that will come back to bite them at the ballot box unless they manage to do something about it closer to the next general election. I know from speaking to family members that they're not happy about this at all. But yeah, I mean, part of me does think though that if it's part of your job that you need to be in two places, you know, you have to run two properties effectively. Should you really have to go into your own pocket to pay the bill? I mean, as long as you're making sure that when you're not in that house, everything's switched off, you're doing your absolute level best to make sure that you're not running up massively. The central heating's not on when you're 400 miles away in London. If you're doing everything possible to keep that bill down as low as possible, then I've not got a massive problem with it. However, I do understand why people will be getting quite frustrated.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, if you're charging £2,400 as an energy bill to your employee or your employers, I suppose, if you're talking about the Houses of Parliament, for a second home, well, you're not in the second home for an awful lot of the time, because technically speaking, you shouldn't be in the second home during recess. You shouldn't be in the second home, you know, when you're in conference season. You shouldn't be in the second home during holiday periods, you know. So, you know, it's not really a 52 weeks a year scenario, is it?
No, well, I mean, I suppose...
Or it shouldn't be, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they could, I suppose, change the rules insofar as, yeah, we will pay for it while you're there. You know, you have to register how long... if you're not there during parliamentary recess, for instance, if you're constantly in London, then not in your constituency, then maybe you shouldn't have to pay for it. It shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all process. That might be a little bit difficult to actually police, I suppose, but I suppose that might be one way of trying to keep the cost down.
Well, this is why I would say it'd be better just to do away with it altogether, because it's not like they can't afford it. It's not as if MPs are poor, you know, compared to the rest of the country. They're making plenty of money. And let's not forget, this is only a very small part of what they claim. You know, they claim all sorts of other things as well while they're supposedly at work in London if their constituents are somewhere else. So I think this is going to be something that people are going to start getting more and more wound up about, because they'll go, well, you know, we're all being told to tighten our belts. I mean, Ed Miliband, for example, who's one of the people who's named in the piece, this is a guy who tells us all that we shouldn't be even using electricity. We shouldn't be using gas. You know, we should be getting heat pumps, and he's claimed 1,100 quid. You know, so sorry, Ed. And I know that I'm not sure where his constituency is, but he's got a house in London where he lives with his family, as far as I'm aware. So are we paying for the house in his constituency? What are we doing? Are we paying for the house that he lives in most of the time? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I imagine so, but I mean, the one thing I would caution against, though, is if we want to attract a wide range of people to become MPs, and like it or not, we do need politicians, we do need MPs to help run the country. What you don't want is to make politics the preserve of the wealthy, people who don't have to worry about whether they have to pay for a second home or not because they've got so...
No, I get that, but it shouldn't be a licence. It shouldn't be a licence to get rich either, which an awful lot of MPs seem to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not entirely sure there are. I think the bigger problem will be people who are making massive amounts of money on the side in jobs that makes you think, well, hang on a minute, you're maybe not devoting all your time to your constituents if you're able to rake in tens of thousands, if not millions of pounds on the side.
I'd rather they were doing that. I'd rather they were doing that than claiming it from us, to be honest, because, you know, then they're subsidising their own expenses and they're not going to be claiming many expenses because they don't need to.
I think it's a basic. I mean, you wouldn't want to, you know, be told you can't claim any expenses. You know, if you have,
I can't claim any expenses. I'm not allowed to.
Well,
the taxman doesn't let me.
Well, if you've got a genuine work-related expense, you shouldn't be having subsidised.
You should tell that to my accountant.
Well, perhaps you should, but you know, you shouldn't have to be subsidising your employer, you know, by going into your own pocket to pay for stuff.
I do that all the time.
Your job.
I mean, that's the trouble. A lot of people do.
Well, maybe, Mike, you should speak to your employer then and try and get that sorted out.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you to suggest it. But, I mean, the bottom line is that most people have to get by with what they do. Most people are not in the very highfalutin position that I'm in or that MPs are in. And most people listening to this show have never claimed expenses in their lives because they don't have those kinds of jobs, you know. So, you know, in the real world, most people don't get to claim anything.
Well, we had the expenses scandal, I'm sure you remember, about 15 years ago, and that led to, quite rightly, a massive public outcry and a huge crackdown on their expenses. And it may well be, you know, we're 15 years down the line, it may well be that we need to have a look at the system again.
Yeah, well, given that they're cracking down on pretty much everything else in the Labour Party, you know, maybe they could have a look at themselves and see whether they can actually change the way the Palace of Westminster operates. Because we've got a whole load of union-related stories this morning. We've got a whole load of stories about how they want to change the workplace, how they want to change the way that Labour's right to switch off work, for example. They want to make it easier for unions to strike. They want to make it easier for people to be prosecuted for misogyny. They want to make it easier for people to do all kinds of things. So, I mean, there's plenty of room for it. But interestingly enough, a new poll is showing that more and more people think that Britain is going in the wrong direction under Keir Starmer. 52% in a recent poll. 22% only think they're going in the right direction. As somebody pointed out to me earlier on, there'll probably be people from the unions, but who knows? But at the end of the day, it's not going great, is it? I mean, even Dan Hodges at the weekend's written a column saying Sue Gray needs to be fired by Keir Starmer because she's messing everything up.
Well, I think that's definitely one to keep an eye on. You know, Sue Gray is incredibly powerful. She's Keir Starmer's chief of staff, for people who don't know who she is. But previously, she'd been a very senior civil servant. Now, we know that in Downing Street there is tension, certainly, between Sue Gray on the one hand and those around her. Right. And there's another chap called Morgan McSweeney, who you may well have heard of, who is sort of head of strategy and policy at Number 10. Now, those two don't see eye to eye. I think that's one tension behind the scenes. It's definitely worth keeping an eye on. I think it will eventually come to a head, and it will be interesting to see who emerges from the wreckage, really, of that row. But yeah, it's true that, you know, they're sitting on a massive majority. It's less than 2 months since they had a huge victory in the election. But it's not all sweetness and light. And, you know, being in government is tough. You know, that comes with the territory. And their job is to try and take the country with them when they're making big changes, or else they'll suffer at the ballot box come 2029. Yeah,
well, they might even suffer a bit at the ballot box before that, because I think there's some local elections coming up in the new year. Because I was reading today that there's a new book coming out. Lord Ashcroft has already written a book about Keir Starmer. He's updating it, apparently, and that will be coming out sometime in the spring, just about around the time that there's some new local elections. Also, the other big thing that they're dealing with at the moment is prisons. You know, the prison service came out over the weekend and said, look, we haven't got the space or the bandwidth, for want of a better word, to be able to lock up all these people. We're going to have to start releasing people much sooner than we thought. This morning it turns out that Operation Early Dawn has been brought in as an emergency measure, basically, to ease prison overcrowding as more rioters are getting sentenced. Now, presumably that means they're going to start letting people go.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was always the big question mark, wasn't it, over this announcement that we're going to crack down, understandably, on people involved in these riots. But that came maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said that the prisons were full and that they were going to have to start letting people out early. Now, that was before the riots and jailing people more severely than had previously been the case. So it's not, on the one hand, it's not surprising, but again, this is a very difficult problem that the government's going to have to sort out. And then people will say, well, hang on a minute, who are you letting out? Are you letting people who are dangerous? Now, the government, I'm sure, will say, no, we're making sure that no one...
I mean, by definition, they're going to be dangerous, aren't they? Because in order, as we know, in order to go into prison in the first place, you have to have done some pretty bad stuff.
Well, that's right. And, you know, the real problem for the government will be if, God forbid, someone is released early and then goes on to commit a really awful crime.
That's a massive risk, isn't it?
Then the government will be in the firing line. People will say, well, hang on a minute, why was this person walking the streets when they're supposed to have another couple of years left to serve inside? So, yeah, that is another danger for them. But then the question is, if you're not going to bang up as many, or if you are going to keep banging up people, where is the money going to come from for more prison spaces? We've heard this time and again from countless governments that they're going to increase the size of the prison estate, but it doesn't seem to happen, and yet we keep recurring having this problem of overcrowded prisons. It's somebody's going to need to grasp the nettle and try and get it sorted.
Yeah, they're going to have to start actually delivering on some of the promises that they're making. And finally, back to the old situation with the small boats. It now seems that weekly small boat crossings have risen yet again. I think more than 500 people came over the weekend. The number just keeps rising and rising and rising. The weather's decent again this week by the looks of things. You know, another headache for Keir Starmer. They still haven't appointed a border czar, you know, a border patrol commander or border command patroller, whichever way around you want to say it. There's no indication whatsoever that any of this is changing.
No, and Keir Starmer's big idea, if you remember, during the election was to smash the gangs.
Yeah.
I think as if no one had ever thought to do that before. But that is the type of thing that it takes time. It involves collaboration with the French, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, if it's going to happen at all.
He made it sound very simple before the election, didn't he? He was basically making out that the Tories had screwed it up, which they have, and there's no doubt about that, and they didn't get to grips with it for 5 or 6 years, and in fact it got worse and worse and worse under their aegis. But it's still getting worse, and now it's not their fault, it's Labour's fault.
Absolutely. When you're in power, the buck stops with you. There's no doubt about that. And in the meantime, while they're trying to get some sort of overarching policy in place, the boats keep coming, and this is something that people genuinely are concerned about. And the previous government said they'd do it, and they didn't. Labour have said they would do it, and they're not doing it. And yeah, you're right. They're the ones now in power, and they're going to have to come up with a solution pretty quickly, or else this is going to be a major crisis for them.
Yeah, it really is. Well, it's a major crisis, I think, already. Kevin, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Kevin Schofield, political editor of HuffPost UK.